My husband dragged me to the corporate gala to impress the new owner. "Stay in the back," he hissed, his smile still fixed for the people watching us. "Your dress is embarrassing." I looked down at the navy blue dress I had bought for $45 at a consignment shop, the one I had pressed twice that afternoon because I wanted to look decent beside him. I didn't answer. I simply stepped back into the shadows near the bar, exactly where Fletcher pointed. Then the billionaire arrived. The room went quiet, the way expensive rooms do when real power walks in. My husband rushed forward with his hand stretched out, his face shining with desperation. But the new owner ignored him. He looked past the suits, past the champagne glasses, past the women in gowns worth more than my car. He looked straight at me. Then he walked across the ballroom, took both my hands in his, and whispered with tears in his eyes, "Maureen, I've been looking for you for 30 years. I still love you." My husband dropped his champagne glass. The sound of it breaking against the marble floor was the first honest thing I had heard all evening. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I had always believed humiliation would feel louder. I imagined it would come with shouting, slammed doors, maybe a room full of people turning to laugh at me all at once. But humiliation, the kind that settles deep in your bones, can be quiet. It can come from a man leaning close enough that only you can hear him. It can come dressed in a tuxedo, wearing a gold watch, standing beneath crystal chandeliers while everyone else thinks he is a gentleman. That was my husband, Fletcher Morrison. At 65, I had learned to read every change in his face. The tightening around his mouth when I said too much, the narrowing of his eyes when I laughed too freely, the small sigh he gave when I wore something he considered unsuitable. That night, standing in the lobby of the Grand Hyatt downtown, I saw all three. His eyes swept over me from my silver hair to the hem of my dress, and disappointment crossed his face so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. I didn't. After 25 years of marriage, a wife learns the language of being judged. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked. I smoothed my hands down the front of the dress. Navy blue, long sleeves, modest neckline, nothing flashy, nothing cheap-looking, at least not to me. The woman at the consignment store had told me it was elegant. She had even said the color brought out my eyes. For one foolish afternoon, I had believed her. "It was the best I could find," I said softly. "With the budget you gave me." Fletcher's jaw tightened. That was a mistake. Mentioning money was always a mistake. He had given me $200 for the month. $200 for clothes, toiletries, hair appointments, birthday cards, small gifts for the wives of his business associates, and anything else he decided was not part of household spending. He called it an allowance, though I was a grown woman who had once managed classrooms, lesson plans, and a life of my own before I became Mrs. Fletcher Morrison. "Just don't draw attention to yourself tonight," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "This evening is important." I knew it was important. Morrison Development had been bleeding money for months. I heard the late-night phone calls through the walls of his study. Words like refinancing, delayed payments, investor confidence, and acquisition floated through the hallway long after midnight. Fletcher never explained any of it to me. He said business would only confuse me. But I was not confused. A man does not polish his shoes 3 times before dinner unless he is afraid the ground beneath him is cracking. Morrison Industries had just been bought by Blackwood Holdings, and the new owner was attending the gala. Fletcher needed him, needed his approval, his contracts, maybe even his mercy. That was why I was there. Not because Fletcher wanted his wife beside him, because a man trying to appear stable brings a wife to a room full of witnesses. The ballroom glittered when we entered. Crystal chandeliers hung above round tables dressed in white linen. Tall arrangements of lilies and white roses stood in silver vases. A string quartet played near the far wall, soft enough not to disturb the conversations of men who measured one another by the cut of their suits. Women moved through the room in silk, satin, diamonds, and practiced smiles. Their gowns caught the light with every step. I became aware of my dress again. The simple sleeves, the careful hem, the tiny pull near the waist I had tried to fix with a needle and thread before we left the house. Fletcher placed his hand lightly at the small of my back, not with affection, but with direction, like steering furniture. "Stand over there," he murmured, pointing toward a dim spot near the bar where a large decorative palm cast shadows against the wall. "I need to speak with the board members." I looked at the place he indicated. It was not a seat, not a table, not even part of a conversation. It was a corner. "Fletcher," I said, keeping my voice low, "would you like me to come with you?" His smile did not move, but his eyes hardened. "No, stay in the back. Your dress is embarrassing." There it was, small enough to deny later, sharp enough to draw blood. A woman nearby turned her head slightly, as if she had heard only the tone but not the words. Fletcher gave her a polished smile, then walked away from me without waiting to see if I obeyed. I did. That is the part I still think about. Not what he said. Not even how he said it. But how quickly I obeyed. I stepped back into the shadows with my hands folded around the small black clutch I had owned for nearly 15 years. I stood there while my husband crossed the ballroom, straightened his shoulders, and transformed himself into the version of Fletcher everyone admired. Confident, charming, successful. The kind of man who remembered names, shook hands firmly, laughed at the right moments, and placed one hand over his heart when speaking about loyalty and family values. No one saw the man who rationed my spending like I was a careless child. No one saw the man who corrected my grammar in front of guests, then called it helping. No one saw the man who had spent 25 years teaching me that peace was easier when I made myself smaller. So I stood in the back. A waiter passed with champagne. I took water instead. Fletcher disliked when I drank in public. He said I became sentimental. He was right about that, at least. Champagne might have made me remember too much. I touched the small silver locket at my throat, hidden just beneath the neckline of my dress. It was the only piece of jewelry I wore that Fletcher had not bought. He hated that locket without knowing why. Perhaps he sensed that it belonged to a part of me he had never reached. Inside, it was nothing dramatic. No photograph, no lock of hair. Just a tiny folded piece of paper, worn soft at the edges, with 3 words written in faded blue ink. Always, Julian Blackwood. I had carried that name against my skin for 30 years. I was 35 when I last saw Julian. Old enough to know better, young enough to believe grief could be buried if you piled enough duty on top of it. Before Fletcher. Before this house. Before the long, quiet years of becoming someone's acceptable wife. Julian had been the one person who looked at me as if I was not too much. Not too emotional. Not too ordinary. Not too loud. Then he was gone. Or I was gone. Some stories are too painful to explain in a single sentence. Across the ballroom, Fletcher had joined a circle of men near the stage. I watched him speak with animated hands, leaning forward in that eager way he tried to disguise as confidence. One of the men nodded politely. Another checked his phone. A third looked over Fletcher's shoulder as if searching for someone more important. I knew that look. I had seen it directed at me for years. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered his words in the lobby. "Your dress is embarrassing." I lowered my eyes to the glass of water in my hand and watched the condensation gather against my fingers. It is strange what a woman remembers when she is trying not to cry. I remembered the first time Fletcher corrected my clothes. We had been married 6 months, invited to dinner at his partner's house in Cherry Creek. I wore a floral dress I loved, soft yellow with little white buttons. He looked at me and said, "You look like someone's secretary, not a businessman's wife." I changed. I remembered the first time he gave me an allowance. He slid the envelope across the breakfast table and said it would help me learn discipline. I thanked him. I remembered the first time he told me not to mention my parents at a company party because construction workers and insurance clerks don't make interesting dinner conversation. I stayed quiet. Memory is not one knife. It is a drawer full of them. And you do not realize how many cuts you have survived until someone asks why you are bleeding. 20 minutes passed, then 30. No one approached me except waiters. No one asked my name. No one wondered why Fletcher Morrison's wife was standing alone by the bar as if she had wandered into the wrong event. I had nearly convinced myself I could endure the evening the way I had endured so many others, by becoming still, polite, invisible. Then the energy in the room changed. It began near the entrance. A hush moved through the crowd, not sudden, but spreading. Conversations softened, heads turned. Men straightened their jackets. Women lifted their chins. Even the quartet seemed to fade. I looked toward the doors. A tall man had entered the ballroom. He wore a black tuxedo, perfectly tailored, simple in a way that made everything else in the room look like it was trying too hard. His hair was dark with silver at the temples. His face was leaner than I remembered, marked by time and power and whatever private sorrows successful men learn to hide. But I knew the way he stood. Before I knew his face, before I allowed myself to believe the impossible, I knew the shape of him. The slight tilt of his head when he listened. The stillness before he moved. The quiet confidence that never needed to announce itself. Someone near me whispered, "That's him, Julian Blackwood." My glass slipped slightly in my hand. Julian. For a moment, the ballroom disappeared. The chandeliers, the flowers, the polished floors, Fletcher's desperate smile across the room, all of it blurred around the edges. 30 years collapsed into one breath. I saw a younger man in a gray sweater standing beside a rain-streaked window, telling me he would wait as long as it took. I saw his hands closing around mine. I saw the hurt in his eyes the day I walked away and made him believe I had stopped loving him. I pressed my fingers against the locket at my throat. No, it could not be him. Not here. Not tonight. Not as the owner of the company Fletcher was trying so hard to impress. But then he turned slightly, and I saw his eyes. Dark, searching, familiar. My heart gave one painful, foolish leap. Across the ballroom, Fletcher moved instantly. He pushed through the crowd with the urgency of a man who sees a lifeboat in rising water. His smile widened, his hand extended. "Mr. Blackwood," Fletcher said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Fletcher Morrison. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Julian accepted the handshake. Politely. Briefly. But he was not looking at Fletcher. His gaze moved over the room with a strange intensity, as if he had walked into that ballroom expecting to find something he had lost. Or someone. I should have turned away. I should have lowered my head, stepped deeper into the shadows, become the obedient wife Fletcher had trained me to be. Instead, I stood completely still. Julian's eyes found mine. The change in his face was immediate. Not recognition at first. Shock. Then disbelief. Then something so raw and open that I forgot how to breathe. He released Fletcher's hand. Fletcher kept talking for several seconds before realizing the man in front of him was no longer listening. Julian took one step toward me, then another. The room seemed to part around him, though no one had been asked to move. People simply did. Power has a current of its own. Fletcher turned, following Julian's line of sight. When he realized Julian was walking toward me, confusion crossed his face. Then irritation. Then alarm. "Mr. Blackwood?" Fletcher said, hurrying after him. "I'd be happy to introduce you. This is my wife, Maureen. She's not involved in the business, of course." Julian did not stop. He came straight to the shadowed corner where my husband had placed me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I saw the boy I had loved in the man standing before me. I saw the years, too. The success, the grief, the questions, the wound I had left behind and never had the courage to close. "Maureen," he said. My name sounded different in his voice, not like an instruction, not like a correction, like something precious returned after being thought lost forever. "Julian," I whispered. His eyes filled. I had never seen Fletcher cry. Not at funerals. Not during bad news. Not when my mother died and I sat alone in our bedroom with my hands folded around a tissue because he had a meeting he could not miss. But Julian Blackwood, the most powerful man in that glittering room, looked at me as if seeing me again had broken something open inside him. He reached for my hands. I should have pulled back. A married woman does not let another man hold her hands in front of an entire ballroom. A proper wife does not let the past touch her in public. But I was tired of being proper for people who had never protected my heart, so I let him take them. His hands were warm, steady, real. "I've been looking for you for 30 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I still love you." The words did not come quietly enough. They carried. Not shouted, not staged, not dramatic in the way Fletcher would later accuse them of being. But honest words have a way of making a room listen. The conversations around us died. Someone gasped. A champagne flute slipped from Fletcher's hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the silence. Fletcher stared at us, his face draining of color, then flushing red. For once, he was the one standing outside a moment he could not control. Julian did not look at him. He looked only at me. And I, Maureen Morrison, 65 years old, wearing a $45 dress my husband had called embarrassing, stood beneath the crystal lights of the Grand Hyatt, while the man I had loved and lost 30 years earlier held my hands as if I had never been invisible at all. For several seconds, no one moved. Julian's hands were still wrapped around mine, warm and firm, as if he was afraid that if he let go, I might disappear again. I could feel the entire ballroom staring at us. Men with polished shoes and expensive watches. Women in silk gowns who had been whispering about vacation homes and charity boards only moments before. Waiters paused with silver trays balanced on one hand. Even the string quartet stopped playing. And there I stood, in the back of the room, exactly where my husband had ordered me to stay. Only now, everyone was looking. Fletcher was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. His voice was too loud, too sharp for a room like that. People in those circles didn't shout. They destroyed each other with smiles and legal letters. Fletcher knew that better than anyone, but humiliation had stripped away his manners. I tried to pull my hands back, but Julian held them for one more second, just long enough for me to understand that he did not want to let go. Then he released me carefully, respectfully, the way a man releases something precious. Fletcher stepped between us. Not beside me. In front of me, like I was a painting he owned and someone had dared to touch. "Mr. Blackwood," Fletcher said, forcing a laugh that convinced no one. "I think there's been some confusion. My wife must remind you of someone." Julian looked at him then, only for a moment. But in that moment, I saw the difference between borrowed confidence and real authority. Fletcher's power always needed witnesses. Julian's did not. "There's no confusion," Julian said quietly. "I know exactly who she is." A small sound moved through the room. Not quite a gasp, more like the room breathing in all at once. Fletcher's face tightened. He turned to me with a smile that was not a smile at all. "Maureen, perhaps you'd like to explain why this man thinks he knows you." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. How do you explain 30 years of buried grief in front of 100 strangers? How do you tell your husband, the man you have served dinner to for 25 years, that before him there had been a love so deep it had shaped everything that came after? How do you admit that the quiet wife in the cheap navy dress once had a life large enough to break her? "I knew Julian a long time ago," I said at last. Fletcher laughed, but his eyes were cold. Clearly. The word landed like a slap. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, though I tried to still them by gripping my clutch. The same hands that had cooked Fletcher's meals, ironed his shirts, written thank you cards to people who never thanked me back. The same hands that had once worn Julian's grandmother's emerald ring. I could feel Julian watching me, not judging, waiting. That was what nearly undid me. Fletcher always pushed. Julian waited. "Maureen," Julian said gently, "can we speak somewhere private?" "No," Fletcher snapped before I could answer. "Absolutely not. She is my wife, his wife. Not Maureen. Not a woman. Not a person with a history that existed before his name was attached to mine. His wife." A few feet away, one of Fletcher's business associates cleared his throat and looked away. His wife touched his arm as if to warn him not to get involved. That was how rooms like this worked. People watched cruelty as long as it was dressed properly. They only objected when it became inconvenient. Julian's jaw tightened. "I wasn't asking you." The room went even quieter. For a moment, I thought Fletcher might do something foolish. His face had gone red from the collar upward, and the vein near his temple pulsed the way it did when a client backed out of a deal or a waiter brought the wrong wine. I had seen that look many times at home, never in public. "Maureen," Fletcher said, lowering his voice, which somehow made it worse. "We are leaving." I did not move. It was such a small act of rebellion that no one else would have noticed it. I simply stayed where I was for one heartbeat longer than he expected. But Fletcher noticed. His eyes flashed. "Now," he said. Julian stepped slightly closer. "If she wants to stay, she can stay." A strange warmth rose in my chest. Not happiness. Not yet. Something smaller and more dangerous. The memory of choice. For 25 years, choices had been presented to me as permissions. Could I visit my sister? Could I buy a coat? Could I speak during dinner with his partners? Could I drive into town alone? Fletcher never said I was trapped. He simply made every door too heavy for me to open. I looked at Julian, and for a second the ballroom disappeared again. I saw the man I had loved before fear taught me to lower my eyes. I saw the life I had walked away from. I saw the question in his face. "Will you disappear again?" "I can't do this here," I whispered. Pain crossed his face, but he nodded. He understood me too quickly, the way he always had. He reached into his jacket and took out a white business card with silver lettering. He held it toward me. "Then call me," he said. "Please." Fletcher made a scoffing sound. "This is absurd." But I took the card. Our fingers brushed. That tiny contact moved through me with more force than all of Fletcher's shouting. I curled my hand around the card and held it against my palm. Fletcher saw it. His mouth thinned. "We're leaving," he said again. This time, he took my arm. Not hard enough for anyone in that room to call it violence. Fletcher was too practiced for that. His grip looked like guidance from a distance. A husband escorting his overwhelmed wife. A man taking control of an awkward situation. But his fingers dug into the soft skin above my elbow. I felt the warning in them. "Do not embarrass me again." Julian saw it too. His expression darkened, and for one breath, I thought he might stop us. Part of me wanted him to. Part of me wanted someone to finally name what had been happening to me for years. But another part of me, the part Fletcher had trained carefully, shook my head. Just slightly. Not here. Julian's eyes filled with a helpless anger that hurt to look at. "I'll be waiting," he said. Fletcher pulled me through the ballroom. Faces turned away as we passed. That was almost worse than staring. People who had watched my husband humiliate me now pretended they had seen nothing. A woman in a silver gown gave me a soft look of pity, then immediately lowered her eyes to her champagne. Pity is easy. Intervention is expensive. The lobby felt colder than when we had arrived. My heels clicked against the marble floor, too loud in the silence between us. Fletcher did not speak until we were inside the car and the valet had closed the door. Then he turned on me. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" I stared through the windshield at the hotel entrance, where golden light spilled onto the sidewalk. People were still arriving, stepping out of black cars, smoothing gowns, adjusting cufflinks, walking toward a night that had already ended for me. "I didn't do anything," I said. Fletcher let out a short, bitter laugh. "You stood there holding hands with the man who owns my company. He came to me. And why would he do that, Maureen?" I closed my eyes. "Because once, before I became the woman you hide in corners, I was loved. But I did not say it. Not yet. Instead, I opened my hand in my lap and looked at Julian's business card. The edges had pressed a small red line into my skin. Julian Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer. Blackwood Holdings. A phone number. An email address. A door. Fletcher reached for it, but I closed my fist. His eyes narrowed. "Give me the card." "No." The word surprised us both. It was barely louder than a breath, but it changed the air inside the car. Fletcher stared at me as if I had spoken in a language he did not know. For 25 years, I had softened every refusal before it reached him. I had said maybe later, "I'm not sure, whatever you think is best." I had not said no. Not like that. He leaned back slowly, his face hardening into something cold and familiar. "You are making a very serious mistake," he said. Maybe I was. But as the car pulled away from the Grand Hyatt and the glittering ballroom disappeared behind us, I held Julian's card against my heart and felt something I had not felt in decades. Not love, not safety, not even courage. just the first small crack in the wall Fletcher had built around my life. Fletcher did not speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive home. That silence frightened me more than his shouting. When Fletcher was loud, I knew where the storm was. When he went quiet, it meant he was choosing his words carefully, sharpening them before he used them. I sat with Julian's business card folded inside my palm, hidden beneath the edge of my clutch. My hand ached from holding it so tightly. I was afraid that if I loosened my fingers, Fletcher would snatch it away, and the whole evening would become something I had dreamed. The city lights moved across the windshield in long gold lines. Denver looked beautiful at night from the passenger seat of Fletcher's car. Clean streets, tall buildings, restaurant windows glowing with warmth, couples walking arm in arm as if they belonged to each other by choice. I looked at them and wondered when I had stopped feeling like someone who had choices. Fletcher finally turned off the classical music. The sudden silence filled the car. "How long?" he asked. I kept my eyes forward. "How long? What? How long have you been in contact with him?" "I haven't." "Don't lie to me, Maureen." The way he said my name made it sound like a warning. I had heard that tone in kitchens, parking lots, hotel lobbies, charity dinners. Always low, always controlled, always meant to remind me that other people might not notice, but I should. "I'm not lying," I said. I hadn't seen Julian in 30 years until tonight. Fletcher laughed once, harsh and short. 30 years, he repeated. And yet he walks into a room, sees you standing there, and announces he still loves you like some cheap romance novel. I looked down at my lap. The insult was meant for both of us. For Julian, because Fletcher hated anything he could not own. For me, because Fletcher had never believed I could inspire that kind of love. "He embarrassed himself," Fletcher said. "And you let him embarrass me." There it was. Not shock. Not hurt. Not even jealousy in the human sense. Embarrassment. That was Fletcher's real wound. Not that another man had loved me. Not that I had a past. Not that my hands had trembled when Julian touched them. Fletcher was angry because people had seen him lose control of something he believed belonged to him. "I didn't ask him to say those things," I whispered, "but you enjoyed it." I turned toward him then. His face was lit by the passing streetlights, hard and pale in flashes. One moment visible, the next shadowed. That was how Fletcher had always been to me. A man who looked respectable when the light was right. "I was shocked," I said. "That is not what I saw." "What did you see?" He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I saw my wife looking at another man like she had been waiting for him all her life. The truth of it sat between us. Heavy. Undeniable. I had no answer that would make Fletcher feel better, and for once, I did not try to invent one. When we reached the house, he pulled into the garage too quickly, the tires squealing against the concrete. The sound made me flinch. He noticed. Fletcher always noticed when fear worked. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lilies he had ordered for the entry table because he thought fresh flowers made visitors believe a home was happy. Our house in Cherry Creek was beautiful in the way a showroom is beautiful. Marble floors, white walls, art chosen by decorators, furniture no one sat in comfortably. Everything expensive. Everything cold. Fletcher took off his tuxedo jacket and threw it over the back of a chair. "Give me the card." I stood near the staircase, still wearing the navy dress he had called embarrassing. The hem brushed against my knees. My feet hurt from the shoes I had polished myself that afternoon. "No," I said. The word came easier this time. Not easy. Easier. Fletcher turned slowly. "You seem to have developed a very dangerous sense of confidence tonight." I said nothing. He stepped closer. "Let me explain something to you. Julian Blackwood is not some miracle from your past. He is a businessman. Men like that collect things, companies, properties, women who make them feel young again. Each word was chosen carefully. Fletcher knew where I was soft. Age, worth, beauty. The fear that whatever Julian remembered might not match the woman standing in front of him now. "You're not 35 anymore, Maureen," Fletcher said. "You're 65. You really think a man like that wants to deal with someone else's aging wife?" I felt the words enter me. For years, I would have absorbed them quietly. I would have gone upstairs, removed my makeup, stared at my face in the mirror, and found every line Fletcher wanted me to hate. I would have apologized the next morning just to restore peace. But tonight, Julian's hands were still warm in my memory. Not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, because when he looked at me, he did not look disappointed. "I'm going upstairs," I said. "We are not done talking." "I am." I did not recognize my own voice. It was quiet, but there was something solid beneath it. Something Fletcher had not heard from me in a very long time. His eyes narrowed, but he did not follow when I climbed the stairs. Maybe he was too stunned. Maybe he still believed I would fold by morning. That had always been my pattern. Survive the night. Smooth things over. Pretend the cut was not deep. In the bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it until my breathing slowed. Then I opened my hand. Julian's card was bent slightly at one corner, damp from my palm. Silver letters caught the soft light from the bedside lamp. Julian Blackwood. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at that name. The house around me was quiet now, but not peaceful. Downstairs, I heard Fletcher open the liquor cabinet. Glass against glass, a cabinet door closing too hard. Then his voice, low and angry, as he made a phone call. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Blackwood made a scene. No, she didn't tell me anything. I don't care what he thinks he remembers. I need to get ahead of this before it affects the deal. The deal. Even now, that was what mattered. Not me. Not the past. Not the fact that I had stood in a ballroom with tears in my eyes while the first man who ever truly loved me reached for my hands. To Fletcher, I was still part of a business problem. I rose and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed both familiar and strange. Silver hair pinned carefully at the nape of her neck. Fine lines around her eyes. A navy dress too plain for a gala but too dignified to deserve shame. On her upper arm, where Fletcher had gripped her at the hotel, a faint red mark was beginning to darken. I touched it lightly. Then I touched the locket at my throat. For years, I had worn it hidden beneath sweaters, blouses, dresses Fletcher approved of. A secret so small no one could accuse me of betrayal. Inside was that folded piece of paper with Julian's handwriting. Always. One word can outlive a whole marriage if it was written by the right person. I opened the locket and looked at the tiny paper until the letters blurred. I thought of every time Fletcher had told me to stand back. Speak less. Smile more. Change clothes. Stay home. Be grateful. I thought those moments were separate. A bad mood. A stressful quarter. A dinner where I had said the wrong thing. But sitting there in my gala dress, with Julian's card in one hand and his old promise in the other, I understood something with painful clarity. Fletcher had not been correcting me. He had been erasing me, little by little, year by year, until even I believed there was nothing left worth seeing. I placed Julian's card inside the drawer of my nightstand, beneath a stack of handkerchiefs Fletcher would never touch. Then I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to my husband's voice downstairs rise and fall through another call. I did not call Julian that night. I was not brave enough yet, but I did not throw the card away. And for a woman who had spent 25 years surrendering every small thing she wanted, keeping that card felt like the beginning of a rebellion. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed until the lamp burned hot beside me and the house settled into its usual expensive silence. Downstairs, Fletcher stopped making phone calls sometime after midnight. I heard the study door close, then the slow, deliberate sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Then nothing. He did not come to our bedroom. That was his way of punishing me. Some women are punished with shouting. Some with slammed doors. Fletcher preferred distance. A cold room. A chair left empty at breakfast. A look that told me I had failed to behave properly, and he was deciding how much forgiveness would cost. But that night, his silence did not frighten me the way it once had. I had something else to listen to. Julian's voice. I've been looking for you for 30 years. I closed my eyes, and the ballroom disappeared. The first time I met Julian Blackwood, I was not standing in a shadow. I was standing in front of a room full of adults at a literacy fundraiser in Boulder, holding a stack of handwritten essays from my students. I was 34 then, teaching adult education classes at a community center on the west side of Denver. Most of my students worked during the day and came to class at night, tired, hungry, and determined. Some were learning English. Some had left school too young and were trying to earn their GED. Some were mothers who wanted to read to their children without pretending they had forgotten their glasses. I loved that work. It did not pay much, but it made me feel useful in a way that mattered. The fundraiser was supposed to help us buy books, classroom supplies, and a second-hand van to bring students in from neighborhoods without reliable bus routes. I had spent 2 weeks preparing my speech. I wore a cream blouse, a brown skirt, and the only pair of heels I owned that did not pinch. I remember standing at the podium, looking out at donors in dark suits and pearl earrings, and feeling my hands shake around the pages. Then I saw him. Julian sat near the back of the room, not because he had been placed there, but because he seemed to prefer watching before being noticed. He was younger than most of the men there, maybe 36, with dark hair, serious eyes, and a stillness that made him stand out more than any loud laugh or expensive watch could have. While I spoke, others glanced at their programs or checked their watches. Julian listened. Really listened. Afterward, he found me near the coffee table, where I was trying to balance a paper plate of cookies and a stack of donation forms. "Your students are lucky," he said. I laughed because I thought he was being polite. "They would be luckier if we had enough books for everyone." He smiled then, not the polished smile of a donor, a real one. "How many books do you need?" I gave him the number. He wrote a check for twice that amount before I finished explaining why I had asked. That was Julian. Direct. Quiet. No performance. A week later, he visited the community center. He wore jeans, a gray sweater, and no trace of the Blackwood name except the confidence that followed him like weather. My students were suspicious of him at first. Wealthy men did not usually come to our building unless they wanted photographs for a newsletter. But Julian did not bring a photographer. He brought boxes of books. Then he stayed to help unload them. By the end of the evening, he was sitting at a folding table beside Mr. Alvarez, a retired mechanic learning to write letters to his grandson in English. Julian listened to every word with the same patience he had given me at the fundraiser. That was when I began to love him. Not all at once. Love at 34 is different than love at 20. It does not arrive like lightning and make you foolish. It comes more quietly, through repeated evidence. A man shows up when he says he will. He remembers what matters to you. He asks questions and stays for the answers. Julian did all of that. For nearly a year, we built something careful and bright. He took me to small restaurants where no one cared about names. I took him to student potlucks where he ate tamales and sweet potato pie from paper plates and said they were better than anything served at the country clubs his family favored. He told me about Blackwood Holdings, about a father who believed love was a weakness, and a mother who measured women by lineage, posture, and table manners. I told him about my parents in Aurora, my father's back pain from years of construction work, my mother's hands always smelling faintly of lemon soap from the insurance office where she answered phones. Julian never made me feel small for where I came from. That was new to me. He used to call me brave. I used to tell him bravery was just what poor people called not having a choice. He did not laugh. He remembered. The night he gave me the locket, we were walking near Sloan's Lake after dinner. It was early fall, and the air smelled like dry leaves and rain that had not arrived yet. He stopped beneath a street lamp, took the small silver necklace from his coat pocket, and fastened it around my neck with hands that trembled only slightly. "It isn't enough," he said. I touched the cool metal. "Enough for what?" "For what I feel. I should have kissed him then, but I cried instead. Quietly, embarrassingly. Julian only pulled me close and held me until I stopped apologizing. A month later, he asked me to marry him. There was no orchestra, no restaurant full of strangers, no ring hidden in champagne. Just Julian in my tiny apartment, standing by the kitchen table while rain tapped against the window. He had brought takeout because I had stayed late grading essays, and I was still wearing a cardigan with chalk dust on the sleeve. He took my hand and said, "I don't want a life that only looks impressive. I want one that feels true. Maureen, marry me." I said yes before he finished the sentence. For 3 months, I lived inside a happiness so complete it frightened me. Then Charles Blackwood asked to meet me. Julian's father did not shout. Men like Charles did not need to. He invited me to his office downtown, offered me coffee I did not drink, and explained my place in the world with the calm precision of a surgeon. He knew about my job, my parents, my student loans, the community center's funding, the grant application Julian had quietly helped me prepare. He knew everything. "You seem like a capable woman," he told me. But capable is not the same as suitable. I sat across from his mahogany desk with my hands folded in my lap, the silver locket hidden beneath my blouse. He said Julian had obligations, a family name, a company, a future that could not be tied to a woman who worked nights in a community center and believed charity events were about charity. Then he leaned forward and told me what would happen if I married his son. The funding for my program would vanish. The grant would die. Donors would step back. My father's union contacts would suddenly find doors closed. My students, the people I had fought so hard to help, would pay the price for my stubbornness. I remember staring at him, waiting for anger to rise. But fear came first. Fear for my students. Fear for my parents. Fear for Julian, who would burn down his entire inheritance to stand beside me and hate himself later for the ashes. So I did the one thing I have regretted for 30 years. I left him. I told Julian I wanted a simpler life. I told him his world was too much. I told him love was not enough. He looked at me as if I had struck him. I still see that look when I close my eyes. 6 months later, Fletcher Morrison asked me to marry him. He was older, stable, respectable, and approved of by the same kind of people who had rejected me before. I mistook safety for peace. By morning, sitting in the pale gray light of our bedroom with Julian's business card hidden in my drawer, I understood the truth. I had not chosen Fletcher because I loved him. I had chosen him because after losing Julian, I no longer trusted love to protect anyone. I kept Julian's business card hidden in my nightstand for 3 days. Every morning, I told myself I would throw it away. Every afternoon, I opened the drawer and looked at it. Every night, after Fletcher fell asleep in the guest room because he was still too disappointed to share a bed with me, I touched the silver letters with one finger and wondered how a piece of paper could feel heavier than a wedding ring. Fletcher watched me during those 3 days, not openly. Fletcher rarely did anything openly when suspicion served him better. But I felt his eyes on me at breakfast when I poured his coffee. I felt them in the hallway when I carried laundry past his study. I felt them at dinner when he asked ordinary questions in a voice that was not ordinary at all. "Did you go anywhere today? Did anyone call? Have you thought about what your little scene cost me?" I answered carefully. "No. No one important. I'm sorry you were embarrassed." The apology tasted like dust. He wanted me to say I was sorry for Julian, sorry for the past, sorry for standing in that ballroom and being seen by someone who remembered me before I learned how to disappear. But I was not sorry for that. On the 4th morning, Fletcher left early for a meeting with potential investors. He wore his dark gray suit, the one he believed made him look trustworthy, and stood in the kitchen doorway before leaving. "I expect you to be here when I get back," he said. It was not a request. I nodded. After the garage door closed, I waited 5 full minutes. Then I walked upstairs, opened the drawer, and took out Julian's card. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I carried it to the kitchen phone because my cell phone was on Fletcher's family plan, and I did not trust anything attached to his name. The house was silent around me. Too silent. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking above the pantry door, my own breathing turning shallow. I dialed the number before I could lose courage. "Blackwood Holdings, Mr. Blackwood's office," a woman answered. Her voice was professional, smooth, belonging to a world where people knew exactly what to say. I almost hung up. "This is Maureen Morrison," I said. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to call." There was a small pause. Then the woman's tone changed, warmed. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Please hold for Mr. Blackwood." He had told her to expect me. That realization nearly broke something open in my chest. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. Julian had said he would wait, and then he had made room for me to arrive. The hold music played for less than 10 seconds. Maureen. Just my name. But I had to grip the edge of the counter to stay steady. Julian. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 30 years stood between us, crowded with all the things we had not said. "Thank you for calling," he said finally. "I almost didn't. I know." That was Julian. He did not fill silence because it made him uncomfortable. He let it tell the truth. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "You don't have to know everything today. Just one thing. Will you meet me somewhere safe?" Safe. The word landed softly, but deeply. No one had asked me that in years. Where would you like to go? What do you need? What feels safe to you? There was a small cafe on 16th Street I used to visit when I needed an hour away from Fletcher's house, the Blue Moon. It sat between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs. Fletcher would have called it shabby. I called it warm. "The Blue Moon Cafe," I said. "In 1 hour. I'll be there." I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time with my hand still on the receiver. Then I did something I had not done in years. I chose my own clothes without wondering what Fletcher would think. I wore dark slacks, a cream sweater, and the silver locket over the fabric instead of hiding it underneath. It felt strange at first, almost indecent, letting that part of my past be visible. Then it felt like breathing. The Blue Moon smelled like roasted coffee and cinnamon when I arrived. A young woman with purple hair smiled at me from behind the counter. A college student sat near the window with textbooks spread across the table. 2 older men played chess in the corner, arguing gently over whose turn it was. No one knew me there. No one expected me to stand in the back. I chose a table against the brick wall and ordered tea I did not drink. Julian arrived exactly on time. He paused in the doorway, scanning the room until he found me. In daylight, he looked less like the untouchable man from the gala and more like the person I had lost. Older, yes, silver at his temples, lines beside his eyes. But the way he looked at me had not changed. Not really. He approached slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might send me running. "You came," he said. "I said I would." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You used to say that whenever I worried too much." The memory moved through me unexpectedly. A rainy night. A broken heater in my old apartment. Julian showing up with soup, a blanket, and 3 flashlights because I had mentioned the power flickered. I looked down at my hands. "I owe you the truth," I said. Julian sat across from me. "Only if you want to give it." That nearly made me cry. Fletcher demanded explanations like debts. Julian received them like gifts. So I told him, not everything at once. The words came slowly, unevenly, but once they began, I could not stop them. I told him about his father's office downtown, the mahogany desk, the coffee I never touched, the way Charles Blackwood had known every weak place in my life and pressed each one with a smile. I told him about the threats to the literacy program, the donors, my parents, my students. Julian's face went pale. "My father did that?" I nodded. "He told me if I married you, he would make sure everyone I cared about paid for it." Julian leaned back as if the words had struck him. His hand tightened around his coffee cup, but he did not interrupt. I told him I had believed I was protecting him. Protecting my students. Protecting the fragile little world I had built from being crushed by a man with too much money and no conscience. Then I told him about Fletcher. Not all of it. Not the ugliest parts. Not yet. But enough. The allowance, the corrections, the way he made decisions and called them kindness, the way he taught me that peace came from silence. Julian listened with a stillness that felt more powerful than anger. When I finished, the tea in front of me had gone cold. "I thought you stopped loving me," he said quietly. His voice broke on the last word. I looked up then. "No," I whispered. That was the one thing I never stopped doing. For a moment, the cafe disappeared the way the ballroom had. The students, the chess players, the hiss of the espresso machine, all of it faded until there was only Julian sitting across from me with 30 years of pain in his eyes. "I looked for you," he said. "After you left. After you married. For years, Maureen. I hired people. I followed every lead I could find. Every time I got close, something disappeared. An address changed. A record went missing. Someone told me you didn't want contact. My skin went cold. What? I thought you were hiding from me, he said. I thought that was your final answer. I shook my head slowly. I never knew. Julian reached across the table, then stopped, waiting for permission. That pause told me more about love than all of Fletcher's speeches about marriage ever had. I placed my hand in his. I'm not asking you for anything you aren't ready to give, Julian said. But I want you to know something. You don't have to stay trapped because Fletcher controls the money. I stared at him. He continued gently. Come work for me. Blackwood Holdings has community programs that need someone who understands literacy, education, real people. Not charity for photographs. Real work. You would have your own salary, your own account, your own choices. My throat tightened. A job. Not rescue. Not pity. A door. I haven't worked outside the home in years, I said. You haven't been allowed to, Julian replied. That isn't the same thing. Those words stayed with me. I walked into that cafe thinking I was meeting a man from my past. I walked out holding the first real possibility of a future. I drove home from the Blue Moon Cafe with both hands on the steering wheel and Julian's words moving through me like a quiet current. You haven't been allowed to. That isn't the same thing. For years, I had told myself I had lost certain abilities. I had forgotten how to work, forgotten how to make decisions, forgotten how to manage money, forgotten how to speak to people without checking Fletcher's face first to see if I had permission. But maybe I had not forgotten. Maybe I had been trained to believe I had. The thought frightened me. It also made me sit a little straighter at a red light. When I pulled into the driveway, Fletcher's car was already in the garage. He should not have been home for another 2 hours. The old fear moved first. It always did. A tightening in my stomach, a quick review of possible explanations, a search for the least dangerous version of the truth. I sat there with the engine off, staring at the door that led into the kitchen, and for a moment I was 25 years younger, rehearsing apologies for crimes I had not committed. Then I looked down at the locket resting openly against my cream sweater. I had worn it outside my clothes all afternoon. No one had died. The world had not ended. So I opened the car door and went inside. Fletcher was waiting in the kitchen. He stood beside the island with a glass of scotch in his hand, though it was barely past 3 in the afternoon. His tie was loosened. His jacket was off. On the counter in front of him was the little notepad I kept near the phone for grocery lists and appointment reminders. My stomach dropped when I saw it. I had written Blue Moon, 1 p.m. without thinking, just in case my nerves made me forget. Fletcher tapped the notepad with one finger. Coffee, he said. I set my purse on the chair. Yes, for 3 hours. Yes, at the Blue Moon. I looked at him carefully. You already know where I was. His eyes narrowed, as if my calmness offended him more than any lie could have. Who were you with? The kitchen was very bright. Afternoon sun poured through the windows and struck the marble counters, making everything look too clean, too sharp. I noticed a small scratch near the sink that had been there for years. I noticed the ticking of the clock. I noticed my own hand resting on the back of the chair, steady. That surprised me. I met Julian, I said. Fletcher stared at me. For once, I had taken away the pleasure of forcing a confession out of me. You what? I met Julian. We talked. His face changed slowly. The red rose from his collar to his cheeks, then drained away, leaving him pale and tight around the mouth. You went behind my back to meet another man. I met someone from my past. You are my wife. There it was again. The phrase he used whenever he had no real argument left. I took a breath. I know what I am legally, Fletcher. I am beginning to remember what I am beyond that. The glass in his hand struck the counter so hard I thought it might break. Do not speak to me like that. I should have stepped back. Every habit in me told me to step back. Instead, I stayed where I was. Fletcher laughed without humor. He filled your head with nonsense, didn't he? One lunch with a billionaire, and suddenly you think you're some independent woman with a future. A future. The word warmed something in me. It had been so long since I had thought of my life as something still ahead of me. For years, the future had felt like a hallway that only led deeper into the same house, the same routines, the same careful silences. Now it had a door in it, Julian offered me a job, I said. Fletcher went still. Not angry. Still. That was worse. What kind of job? Community relations, literacy programs, school partnerships. Work I understand. You haven't worked in decades. I worked before you. You volunteered before me. There's a difference. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The silver hair, the expensive shirt, the gold watch inherited from his father, the posture of a man who believed money made every sentence heavier. You always do that, I said quietly. Do what? Reduce anything I was before you until it sounds small. His mouth twisted. I tell the truth. No. You tell the version that keeps me dependent. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. For a moment, the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Fletcher moved toward me, slowly, the way he did when he wanted me to feel the distance closing. You are not taking that job. I haven't decided yet. You have decided nothing. I decide what affects this household, this marriage, and my reputation. My reputation. Not our marriage. Not our life. His reputation. I thought of the gala, of the way he had placed me in the shadows because my dress did not serve the image he wanted. I thought of Julian walking across the room, not caring who watched. I thought of the cafe, of Julian waiting for permission before touching my hand. The difference between possession and love can be measured in a pause. I am not asking your permission, I said. The sentence was small, plain. But it changed the room. Fletcher's eyes hardened. Be very careful, Maureen. I have been careful for 25 years. And it gave you a very comfortable life. I almost laughed. Comfortable. A word people use when they want a cage to sound like a gift. Yes, I said. The house is comfortable. The furniture is comfortable. The silence is not. His expression flickered. For the first time, I saw something beneath his anger that looked almost like fear. He reached for my purse. I grabbed it before he could. Give it to me, he said. No. His hand closed around my wrist, not hard enough to leave a mark immediately. Just hard enough to remind me he could. I looked down at his fingers, then back at his face. Let go, he smiled. Or what? The old Maureen would have gone quiet. She would have calculated the fastest path to peace. She would have let him search the purse, read the card, own the moment. But I had sat across from Julian that afternoon and remembered that my voice could still belong to me. Or I will call the police, I said. Fletcher released me as if my skin had burned him. The shock on his face was almost satisfying. You wouldn't dare. I slipped my purse strap over my shoulder. You don't know what I would dare anymore. I walked past him toward the staircase. My legs were trembling by the time I reached the first step, but I did not stop. Fear was still there. It had not vanished just because I said no a few times. It moved with me, old and familiar. But something else moved beside it now. Not courage exactly. Practice. Maybe courage was not a feeling you waited for. Maybe it was just a thing you practiced until your hands stopped shaking. In the bedroom, I locked the door. Fletcher hated locked doors. In his house, privacy was treated like suspicion. I took Julian's card from my purse and placed it beside the locket on the nightstand. Then I sat on the bed, staring at both of them. One was from the man I had lost. One was from the man who had found me. Downstairs, Fletcher slammed a cabinet. A minute later, his study door closed with enough force to rattle the frame. I did not flinch. Not this time. I picked up the phone on my nightstand and dialed the number before fear could talk me out of it. Julian answered on the first ring. Maureen? I closed my eyes. The sound of my name in his voice steadied me more than I wanted to admit. I want to accept the job, I said. There was a pause, a quiet inhale. Then Julian said, Then tomorrow, we begin. I did not sleep after calling Julian. The house was too quiet, but not peaceful. Fletcher was downstairs in his study for most of the night. Every so often, I heard his voice through the floor, low and tense, speaking to someone on the phone. Once, near 2 a.m, I heard a drawer slam. Later, glass breaking. I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked. It felt childish at first, locking a bedroom door in my own house. Then I corrected myself. Not childish. Necessary. That was how much of my life had changed in less than a week. Things Fletcher had taught me to see as disrespectful were starting to look like survival. At 6:30, I showered, dressed in black slacks and a pale blue blouse, and pinned my silver hair neatly at the back of my neck. I did my makeup with careful hands. Not too much. Not for Fletcher. Not for Julian either. For myself. The woman in the mirror still looked tired. There were shadows beneath her eyes. The red mark on her wrist had faded to a faint bruise, but she did not look invisible. That was enough. When I came downstairs, Fletcher was already at the kitchen table. He had not changed from the night before. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. In front of him sat a cup of coffee he had not touched and a stack of papers arranged too neatly to be casual. I knew that look. Fletcher had prepared a performance. "Sit down," he said. "I have somewhere to be." His mouth curved. "Your little job?" "My job," I corrected. He looked almost amused. "You haven't even started, and already you sound ridiculous." I reached for my purse from the chair near the door. "Maureen." I stopped, not because he ordered me to, but because something in his voice had changed. It was not rage now. It was confidence. Cold, satisfied confidence. The kind he wore when he believed he had the winning card. "You should hear this before you embarrass yourself further." I turned around. Fletcher tapped the papers in front of him. "Do you know when Julian Blackwood first tried to find you?" The question struck me strangely. My fingers tightened around my purse strap. "I know he searched for me." "Yes," Fletcher said. "He did." He leaned back in his chair, watching my face. "The first inquiry came 6 months after our wedding." For a moment, I did not understand the sentence. 6 months after our wedding, I had still been waking up with Julian's name caught behind my teeth. I had still been hiding in the bathroom some mornings because grief arrived without warning. I had believed Julian was gone forever because I had made him believe I wanted him gone. "What are you saying?" I asked. Fletcher folded his hands on the table. "I am saying your devoted Mr. Blackwood was not as noble and silent as you imagine. He hired a private investigator. Then another. Then another. He looked for you for years." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a chair. "You knew?" Of course I knew. The casualness of it was worse than a confession shouted in anger. He spoke as if we were discussing a plumber he had turned away at the door. "How?" Fletcher gave a small shrug. "Money leaves trails. Investigators ask questions. People talk when they are paid to talk. The first detective called an old acquaintance of mine by mistake. After that, it was simple enough to manage. Manage. That word. He had managed my wardrobe, my phone calls, my spending, my friendships. Now I understood he had managed my past too. "You stopped him from finding me," I said. "I protected our marriage." "No." My voice was barely above a whisper. "You trapped me in it." His eyes hardened. "Don't be dramatic. You were my wife. I had every right to keep some obsessed former lover from interfering in our life." "Our life?" I repeated. "You mean your life, your house, your reputation, your version of me." Fletcher's smile thinned. "And what would you have done, Maureen? If Julian had knocked on the door 10 years into our marriage, 15, would you have left?" The answer was in the room before I spoke it. Yes, I would have left. Even if I had no money. Even if I was afraid. Even if all we had was an honest conversation and one afternoon to decide what came next. I would have wanted the choice. Fletcher saw it on my face. His expression changed, and for the first time that morning, pain slipped through the anger. Not love, not heartbreak, possessive injury. The look of a man whose locked cabinet has been opened. "You ungrateful woman," he said softly. Something in me went still. For 25 years, gratitude had been the chain he polished before placing it around my neck. Be grateful for the house. Be grateful for the allowance. Be grateful I married you. Be grateful I keep you comfortable. I looked at the marble floors, the imported cabinets, the expensive appliances I had cleaned more often than I had chosen. I thought of the gala, the shadow near the bar, the dress he called embarrassing. Then I looked back at him. I was grateful for a cage, because you convinced me the outside world was worse. Fletcher stood so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor. You think Julian is the outside world? He is using you. Do you hear me? He wants to humiliate me. This job, this sudden interest in you, all of it is revenge. Maybe, I said. That surprised him. I continued. Maybe Julian has his own reasons. Maybe he remembers me better than I deserve. Maybe he will change his mind when he realizes how much time has passed. Fletcher's eyes sharpened, sensing weakness. But even if all of that is true, I said, it does not make you safe. It only means I will have to learn how to stand on my own. For a few seconds, Fletcher said nothing. Then he laughed, low and cruel. On your own? You have no accounts in your name worth mentioning. No recent work history. No friends I haven't already warned about your instability. You walk out that door, and I will make sure every credit card is frozen by noon. I believed him. That was the most frightening part. Fletcher was not bluffing. He knew banks, lawyers, accountants. He knew how to make cruelty look like procedure. A man like him did not need to raise his hand if he could bury you in paperwork. I will file for divorce first, he said. I will tell them you abandoned the marriage. I will tell them you are having an affair with Julian Blackwood. I will tie you up in court until you are too old and too broke to start over. The old fear rose again. Fast, familiar, bitter. For one moment, I saw myself as Fletcher wanted me to see myself. A 65-year-old woman with a few clothes, no independent savings, and a job offer that could disappear as quickly as it arrived. Then I remembered the Blue Moon Cafe. Julian stopping his hand before touching mine, waiting for permission. I remembered my own voice saying, I want to accept the job. I remembered the answer. Then tomorrow, we begin. Fletcher had controlled many things, but he had not controlled that. I picked up my purse. He stepped in front of the door. Move, I said. You are not leaving this house. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they clarified everything. This was not marriage. It had not been marriage for a long time. It was ownership. I looked at Fletcher Morrison, the man I had served coffee to, stood beside, defended, excused, and feared for 25 years. Then I said the truest sentence I had spoken in that kitchen. I am not your property. His face went white. I walked around him before he could answer. My hand was shaking as I opened the door to the garage, but I opened it. Behind me, Fletcher said, you will come crawling back. I did not turn around. I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and drove until the house disappeared from the rearview mirror. Only then did I pull into a grocery store parking lot and let myself breathe. My phone was in my hand before I realized I had reached for it. Julian answered on the first ring. Maureen? I'm leaving him, I said. There was no hesitation in his voice. Where are you? I looked through the windshield at the ordinary morning unfolding around me. People pushing carts. A mother buckling a child into a car seat. An old man carrying a bouquet of flowers wrapped in plastic. The world had not stopped because I had finally stepped out of my cage. I don't know yet, I said. Then come to me, Julian replied. We'll figure out the rest one step at a time. I did not go to Julian's house. Even in the middle of leaving Fletcher, some part of me understood that I needed to begin my new life standing on my own feet, not by stepping straight into another man's arms. So I drove downtown. Blackwood Holdings occupied the top floors of a glass building near 17th Street, the kind of place I had passed for years without imagining I belonged inside. The lobby had stone floors, tall windows, and a security desk where people spoke in calm, professional voices. I parked 3 blocks away because the parking garage entrance looked too intimidating. Then I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes. My purse was on the passenger seat. Inside, it were my wallet, my phone, Julian's business card, 1 lipstick, and the old silver locket I kept touching as if it could tell me what to do next. I had left Fletcher's house with no suitcase, no plan, and only the clothes I was wearing. A 65-year-old woman should not have to start over with less than a weekend guest. But there I was. Julian met me in the lobby, not with a dramatic embrace, not with roses, not with the kind of scene Fletcher would have mocked for months. He simply walked toward me, looked at my face, and said, "You made it." Those 3 words nearly brought me to tears. Not "what happened?" Not "are you sure?" Not "I told you so." You made it. as if leaving that house was not foolish or shameful, but an arrival. "I didn't bring much," I said. "You brought yourself," he replied. "That's enough for today." He did not touch me until I nodded. Then he placed one hand lightly on my shoulder, just for a moment, and guided me toward the elevators. The receptionist smiled at him, then at me. Not the polite smile people gave Fletcher's wife at business dinners. This smile had no pity in it. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," she said. The name landed awkwardly. Morrison. Fletcher's name still attached to me like a label sewn into clothing I no longer wanted to wear. Julian noticed, but he said nothing. That was one of the things I was beginning to remember about him. He did not grab at every wound just because he saw it. His office was on the 32nd floor, with windows overlooking the city and the mountains beyond it. The view was beautiful in a way that made me quiet. Denver stretched beneath us, ordinary and shining at the same time. Cars moved like beads of light. The sky was clear. The Rockies stood in the distance, steady and impossible to own. For the first time that morning, I breathed deeply. Julian's assistant, Rebecca, came in with coffee, tea, and a folder. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, warm, without being overly sweet. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to prepare the onboarding documents," she said. "But there's no rush. We can go at your pace. My pace." I almost laughed. For 25 years, everything in my life had moved according to Fletcher's pace. His meetings, his moods, his dinners, his reputation. Even my sadness had been expected to fit around his schedule. Rebecca placed the folder in front of me. Director of Community Literacy and Outreach. My name was typed underneath. Maureen Morrison. I stared at it too long. Julian sat across from me, not behind his desk. That mattered. He did not place the desk between us like power. He sat in the chair beside mine, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd me. "This is real?" I asked. "Yes. I don't want a charity position. It isn't one. I don't want people thinking I got this because of what happened at the gala. People will think many things," Julian said. "Most of them will be wrong. The work will prove itself." I looked at the job description. Partnerships with public libraries, adult literacy grants, school reading programs, community education events. Everything on the page felt like a road leading back to a version of me I thought had been buried. "My resume is 25 years out of date," I said. "Your experience isn't." I swallowed hard. A woman can survive years of insults and still be undone by one sentence of respect. Rebecca walked me through the paperwork. Direct deposit, health benefits, office access, a company email, a salary that made my hands go cold. $2,500 a week. I read the number twice, then a third time. Fletcher used to give me $200 a month and call it generous. I must have gone pale because Julian leaned forward. "Maureen? I've never had that much money in my own name." His expression softened, but he did not make the mistake of saying he was sorry. I was grateful for that. Pity would have made me feel naked. "Instead," he said, "then we'll make sure the account is yours only." By noon, Rebecca had helped me open a new bank account online. My first paycheck would go there. My benefits would begin the following month. There was an office down the hall that still needed furniture, but it had a window and my name printed on a temporary sign taped to the door. I stood in front of it for a long time. Maureen Morrison. Temporary sign. Temporary name. But a real door. Around 1 o'clock, I went downstairs to buy a sandwich from the cafe in the lobby. I chose turkey on wheat, a bottle of iced tea, and a small bag of chips because I could. The cashier rang it up. My card declined. I thought it was a mistake. She tried again. Declined. Heat rose in my face. People behind me shifted impatiently. The old shame came fast, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. "I'm sorry," I murmured, reaching for another card. Declined. Fletcher had moved quickly. Of course he had. I stepped aside with my face burning, leaving the sandwich on the counter. Before I could decide whether to cry or disappear, Rebecca appeared beside me. "I've got it," she said lightly, as if we were friends and this was nothing. "No, I can't. You can pay me back when you want." She handed the cashier her card. Or not. Nobody should face big life decisions hungry. I carried the sandwich upstairs without tasting it. Julian did not ask why my eyes were red when I returned. Rebecca must have told him, because 10 minutes later, a woman named Elaine Porter entered his office. She was a family attorney, silver-haired, direct, and calm in a way that reminded me of a judge. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, shaking my hand. "I understand we need to protect you before your husband mistakes financial control for legal strategy." It was the first time anyone had named it so plainly. Financial control. Not misunderstanding. Not marital conflict. Control. Elaine explained my options. Temporary support. Separate accounts. Documentation. A record of Fletcher's threats. The importance of not returning to the house alone. Every practical sentence placed another board beneath my feet. By late afternoon, Fletcher had left 6 voicemails. I listened to none of them. Then an email arrived. Subject line, final warning. I opened it with Julian and Elaine beside me. Fletcher had filed to freeze our joint accounts. He accused me of abandoning the marriage, damaging his business reputation, and engaging in an inappropriate relationship with Julian. He threatened litigation, public exposure, and full financial consequences. For a moment, the room tilted. Then Elaine took the printed email from my shaking hand. "Good," she said. I looked at her, stunned. "Good. Threats in writing are useful." Julian's face was grim, but his voice was steady. "He wants you scared enough to go back." I looked out the window at the mountains, still standing in the distance, untouched by all the noise of men and money. "He always knew how to scare me," I said. Julian stepped beside me, leaving space between us. And now? I looked at the temporary sign on my office door. My unopened sandwich. The legal folder. The new bank account. My hands were still shaking. But I was still standing. "Now," I said, "I want to know what else he's been hiding." For the next 48 hours, Fletcher tried every door he still believed he owned. He called my phone until I turned it off. He emailed me long, polished messages that began with disappointment and ended with threats. He left a voicemail for Julian's office, saying he wanted to discuss the inappropriate influence being exerted over my wife. He contacted 2 board members at Blackwood Holdings. He called Elaine Porter's law office and demanded to know who was paying my legal fees, as if my right to protection depended on whether he approved the invoice. By Friday morning, he had done what Fletcher always did when private control failed. He made the matter public. The email went out to nearly everyone from the gala. I know because Rebecca brought it to me, printed on white paper, her mouth pressed into a line. "Maureen," she said gently, "you should see this before someone else mentions it." I was in my new office, sitting at a borrowed desk with only 3 things on it: a yellow legal pad, a company laptop, and a paper cup of coffee I had forgotten to drink. My name was still taped to the door on a temporary sign. I took the page from her. The subject line read, "A personal matter affecting professional conduct." My hands went cold before I read the first sentence. Fletcher had written it like a wounded husband and a responsible businessman. He expressed regret over the unfortunate scene at the gala. He said my emotional vulnerability had been exploited by Julian Blackwood. He implied Julian was using me to pressure Morrison development during contract negotiations. He described me as confused, unstable, and deeply influenced by unresolved issues from my past. He never called me cruel names. Fletcher was too careful for that. He made me sound fragile. That was worse. A cruel woman can defend herself. A fragile woman is dismissed before she speaks. By the time I finished reading, I was trembling so hard the paper rattled. Rebecca closed the office door. "None of us believe this," she said. I looked up at her. She seemed to understand what that sentence meant to me. For years, Fletcher had taught me that his version of events would always be the version people accepted. He was polished. I was emotional. He was logical. I was sensitive. He was successful. I was fortunate. "What does Julian say?" I asked. "He says it's your decision how to respond." Not his decision. Mine. That frightened me almost as much as Fletcher's email. Elaine arrived an hour later with a leather briefcase and the expression of a woman who had been underestimated by men all her life and survived every one of them. "We respond with facts," she said, sitting across from me. "Not emotion. Not accusation. Facts. I don't want this to become ugly," I whispered. Elaine's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. It already is ugly. Your husband made it public because he expected shame to bring you back into line. I looked down at Fletcher's printed email. Shame. Yes. That was always his favorite leash. Julian came in shortly after. He did not touch me. He did not stand too close. He simply took the chair beside the window, leaving Elaine in control of the room. That mattered too. A weaker man would have tried to rescue me loudly. Julian let me remain the center of my own life. Elaine placed a folder on my desk. Before we respond, there is something you need to understand. We began reviewing Fletcher's financial disclosures yesterday. What he sent over does not match public records. I frowned. What does that mean? It means your husband is either careless, dishonest, or both. Julian's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Elaine opened the folder. There were bank statements, property records, loan documents, company filings, pages of numbers that made my eyes blur at first. Fletcher had always insisted I would not understand financial matters. For 25 years, I believed him because believing him was easier than fighting for access to information he never intended to share. Elaine slid one page closer to me. Do you recognize this account? I looked at the bank name. Then the number. No. It received deposits from Morrison Development over the past 9 years. Regular amounts. Sometimes $10,000. Sometimes $50,000. Sometimes more. I shook my head slowly. I've never seen this. Your name appears on related household asset reports, but not as an account holder. The words were too neat for the sickness rising in my stomach. So Fletcher used my name? It appears he used your marriage as part of the financial picture he presented to lenders and investors, Elaine said, but he did not give you access to the assets he claimed benefited both of you. I thought of the $200 a month, the declined card in the lobby cafe, the way Fletcher had said I should be grateful. Something in me hardened. What else? I asked. Elaine looked at Julian once, then back at me. There are payments to private investigation firms going back decades. The room became very still. Julian leaned forward. Elaine turned the page. The first invoice was dated 29 years earlier, not long after my wedding to Fletcher. The description was vague. Location services, personal inquiry, contact suppression consultation, contact suppression. 2 words on a page. 2 words that held 30 stolen years. Julian rose and walked to the window. He placed one hand against the glass and bowed his head. I could not look at him for long. His pain felt too close to my own. Elaine continued, gently now. There are more. Different firms. Different states. Payments continued for years. I saw Fletcher at the breakfast table, telling me as if it were nothing. I protected our marriage. No. He had purchased my isolation invoice by invoice. I pressed my fingers against my temple. He put it in writing? Men like Fletcher often do, Elaine said. They believe paperwork makes cruelty legitimate. By late afternoon, Elaine drafted a response. Not dramatic. Not bitter. It stated that I was represented by counsel, that I rejected Fletcher's claims regarding my mental state, that any business disputes would remain separate from my personal legal rights, and that future attempts to publicly defame me would be met with appropriate action. She asked if I wanted to read it before it was sent. I did. Every word. Then I nodded. Send it. My voice did not shake. Fletcher responded within 20 minutes. This time, not by email. He arrived in person. Security called Julian's office first, then mine. Fletcher Morrison was in the lobby, demanding to see his wife. His wife. Even after everything, he still said it like ownership. Elaine advised me not to go down. Julian said the same, though more quietly. But I looked at the printed email on my desk, the financial documents, the invoices, the temporary sign with my name on the door. No, I said. I want to see him. We met in a conference room off the lobby with glass walls and security standing outside. Elaine sat beside me. Julian stood near the door, silent but present. Fletcher entered wearing a perfect navy suit and the expression of a man prepared to forgive someone publicly. Then he saw the folder in front of Elaine. Something flickered across his face. Fear. It was gone quickly, but I saw it. Maureen, he said, softening his voice. This has gone far enough. I looked at him across the table. For once, I did not fold my hands in my lap. I placed them flat on the polished wood where everyone could see they were steady. Yes, I said. It has. He tried to smile. Come home. We can discuss all of this privately. Private is where you do your worst work, Fletcher. His eyes sharpened. Elaine opened the folder and slid one invoice across the table. Contact suppression consultation. Fletcher looked down. For the first time in 25 years, I watched my husband search for words and find none. I leaned forward slightly. How much did you pay? I asked, to make sure the man I loved believed I didn't want to be found? The room went silent. Fletcher's face changed. The polished husband disappeared. The respectable businessman cracked. And underneath, I saw the man who had built my cage with checks, signatures, and lies. Fletcher stared at the invoice on the conference table as if the paper had betrayed him. For once, his silence did not belong to him. It belonged to me. Contact suppression consultation. I had read the phrase at least a dozen times since Elaine first showed it to me, but seeing it in front of Fletcher changed the weight of it. It was no longer just evidence. It was a mirror. A clean, white, professionally formatted mirror reflecting the ugliest part of my marriage. Fletcher lifted his eyes slowly. You have no idea what you're looking at, he said. His voice had lost its smoothness. There was still arrogance in it, but now it had edges. A man can pretend not to be afraid, but fear always finds a way out. It was in his jaw, in his fingers, in the way he did not touch the paper. Elaine Porter folded her hands calmly. Then explain it. Fletcher looked at her with the irritation of a man who had not expected another woman in the room to have teeth. This was a private family matter. No, Elaine said. This was a paid effort to interfere with another person's ability to contact my client. Repeatedly. Over decades. My wife was vulnerable, Fletcher snapped. Blackwood was obsessed. I protected her. I almost smiled at the word. Protected. Fletcher had used it so often that for years I mistook it for care. He protected me from my friends. Protected me from my family's influence. Protected me from financial stress by making sure I never saw the money. Protected me from embarrassment by telling me where to stand. Julian remained near the door, his face unreadable. But I saw his hand tighten at his side when Fletcher called him obsessed. Do not pretend this was about Maureen's safety, Julian said quietly. Fletcher turned toward him, grateful for a target. You don't get to lecture me about my marriage. No, Julian replied. But I do get to ask why your company paid 3 private firms through accounts that also appear in suspicious real estate transfers. The room changed. I felt it before I understood it. Fletcher's face went blank for half a second. Not angry. Blank. Like someone had switched off the lights behind his eyes. Elaine opened another folder. This one was thicker. Mr. Morrison, she said, we requested preliminary financial review because you threatened to freeze marital assets. What we found raises concerns far beyond the divorce. Fletcher laughed, but it came out wrong. You found nothing. You people are desperate. Elaine slid a bank statement across the table. Then another. Then a property record. Then a list of transfers with company names I had never heard before. Redstone Development, Hale River Holdings, Canyon Bridge Partners. They sounded respectable. That was the trick with names like that. They sounded like buildings with glass doors and conference rooms, not places where secrets were hidden. Do you recognize these entities? Elaine asked. Fletcher did not answer. I looked from the papers to him. For 25 years, he had told me business was too complicated for me. Now, sitting in that glass-walled conference room, I understood why. Not because I could not understand it, because I might have asked the wrong question, or the right one. These companies invested in Morrison development projects, Elaine continued. Large sums came in. Large sums went out. The projects themselves appear to have been used to move money between accounts while creating the appearance of legitimate income. My stomach tightened. I had heard enough crime stories on television to know what she was describing, but hearing it connected to Fletcher made the room feel unreal. The man who corrected my table settings. The man who lectured me about dignity. The man who told me my dress embarrassed him. Money laundering. I did not say the words aloud, but they filled the space between us. Fletcher stood abruptly. "This meeting is over." Elaine did not move. "Sit down, Mr. Morrison." He gave her a look that might have frightened me once. It did not touch her. "You are my wife's divorce attorney," he said, "not a prosecutor." "No," Elaine said, "but federal investigators are already aware of several of these transactions." Fletcher froze. That was when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. This was not the first time he had heard the word federal. Julian stepped forward then, calm but pale. "When Blackwood Holdings acquired the company connected to your development contracts, our compliance team reviewed every pending relationship. Your numbers didn't make sense. We flagged them before the gala." Before the gala. I remembered Fletcher adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, telling me not to embarrass him. He had not been nervous only because he needed a contract. He had been afraid the new owner might look too closely. And then Julian had walked into the ballroom and seen me. My existence had become the one complication Fletcher never planned for. "You had no right," Fletcher said. Julian's voice stayed level. "To review the financial risk of a company asking to do business with mine? I had every right." Fletcher looked at me then, and I saw hatred so pure it almost steadied me. "You did this." The old Maureen would have flinched. The old Maureen would have tried to explain that she had not meant for anything to happen, that she did not know, that she was sorry for causing trouble. But that woman had been left somewhere between the Grand Hyatt ballroom and the Blue Moon Cafe. "No," I said. "You did." His hand curled into a fist on the table. Security outside the glass wall shifted. Fletcher noticed. Of course he did. Men like him always notice when the room no longer belongs to them. He straightened his jacket, trying to gather the remains of himself. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "All of it. My attorneys will handle it." Elaine looked down at the folder. "I'm sure they will." The conference room door opened. A man and a woman entered, both in plain suits, both calm in a way that made my skin prickle. The woman showed identification to Elaine first, then to Julian. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words appeared on her badge, black against gold. Fletcher did not move. The male agent turned to him. "Mr. Morrison, we'd like to ask you some questions regarding Morrison Development and several associated financial entities." For one suspended moment, Fletcher looked exactly as he had at the gala after the champagne glass shattered. Stunned, exposed, smaller than he wanted anyone to see. Then the mask returned, though not as well as before. "I won't answer anything without my attorney." "That is your right," the female agent said. Her voice was almost kind. That made it worse. They did not handcuff him in front of me. Life is not always that theatrical. But they did escort him from the conference room, one agent on either side, while security held the elevator. People in the lobby turned to look. Fletcher kept his chin high. I knew that posture. He had used it for charity dinners, business photos, and the gala where he told me to stand in the back. Only now, no one was fooled. As he passed the glass wall, his eyes found mine. I expected anger. I expected blame. What I saw was something closer to disbelief. Fletcher had truly believed he could control every story because he had controlled mine for so long. He had forgotten that paperwork remembers. Doors closed. The elevator took him down. And I was still sitting at the conference table with my hands flat on the wood, listening to the quiet after 25 years of noise. Julian came to my side, but he did not touch me. "Maureen," he said softly. I looked at the folders spread across the table. The invoices, the bank records, the transfers, the proof of a life I had been kept from understanding. "I thought he just didn't love me," I said. My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Elaine's face softened. I swallowed hard. But it was more than that, wasn't it? Julian knelt beside my chair so I would not have to look up at him. "Yes," he said. "It was more," I nodded slowly. There should have been satisfaction, triumph, relief. Instead, I felt tired all the way through. Because when a cage finally opens, the first thing you feel is not freedom. It is the weight of how long you lived inside it. The first night after Fletcher was taken away for questioning, I did not celebrate. I thought I would. Some small, wounded part of me had imagined that when the truth finally came out, I would feel light. I would stand taller. I would breathe deeply. I would become the woman I had been before Fletcher taught me to lower my eyes. Instead, I sat alone in a hotel room downtown with a paper cup of tea going cold on the nightstand and cried so quietly I could barely hear myself. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I missed the house. I cried because I was finally safe enough to understand how unsafe I had been. For 25 years, I had lived inside a marriage that looked respectable from the outside. There had been holiday cards, business dinners, charity events, matching towels in guest bathrooms, and a husband who always knew how to shake hands with the right people. People saw the surface and called me lucky. I saw the inside and learned to call it normal. That was what hurt most. Not just what Fletcher had done. What I had learned to accept. The next morning, Elaine Porter met me in the lobby with a stack of documents and a paper bag containing 2 blueberry muffins. "You need to eat," she said, placing one in front of me. I almost refused out of habit. Then I remembered no one was there to measure what I deserved, so I ate the muffin. It tasted like sugar and grief. Fletcher was not arrested that day, but he did not return to the house either. His attorneys advised him to stay away from me while the investigation widened. Elaine filed for temporary protection regarding access to marital assets, and the court moved quickly once the financial control became clear. Those words appeared in writing: financial control, emotional coercion, asset concealment, marital misconduct. There is a strange comfort in seeing pain translated into legal language. It does not heal you, but it proves you did not invent it. Julian offered to arrange a long-term suite for me, but I refused. Not because I did not trust him, but because I was beginning to understand something important. Freedom borrowed from another person is still not fully yours. So Rebecca helped me find a small apartment near Washington Park. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, a little balcony just big enough for a chair and a potted basil plant. The kitchen cabinets were old, and the bathroom sink dripped if I did not turn the handle exactly right. I loved it immediately. The first thing I bought with my own money was not furniture. It was a red kettle. Fletcher hated red in kitchens. He said it looked cheap. I stood in the aisle at Target holding that kettle like a sacred object, and when the cashier told me the total, I paid with the debit card linked to my new account. Approved. 1 word on a small screen. I nearly cried again. Not every victory announces itself loudly. Sometimes it is a bank card working when you buy a kettle no one gave you permission to want. My new office at Blackwood Holdings slowly became mine. Rebecca found a proper nameplate for the door, not temporary paper. Real brushed metal. Maureen Morrison. I looked at it for a long time, then asked her if we could leave space for a change later. She smiled like she understood. The work saved me in ways I did not expect. At first, I thought I was too rusty. Too old. Too far removed from the world of emails, budgets, meetings, and professional decisions. Then the first school principal came in to discuss a reading partnership for 2nd graders in Aurora. She was exhausted, underfunded, and trying not to show how badly her students needed help. I knew that look. By the end of the meeting, I had 3 pages of notes, 2 program ideas, and a reminder in my calendar to call the public library director. When the principal shook my hand, she said, "You really understand what we're dealing with." I carried that sentence around for the rest of the day. You really understand. Not you look nice. Not stand over there. Not don't embarrass me. Understand. For weeks, Julian and I worked carefully around each other. He checked on me, but not too often. He invited me to lunch, but accepted no when I needed space. Sometimes we walked to the Blue Moon Cafe after work and sat at the same table where I had told him the truth. We talked about ordinary things at first. Books. Coffee. The weather. The way Denver had changed and somehow stayed the same. We did not rush into romance. At 65, I no longer believed love needed to sprint to prove itself. What I needed was steadiness. Space. A love that could sit beside silence without trying to own it. Julian seemed to understand that. One afternoon, nearly 6 weeks after I left Fletcher, he walked me to my car after a meeting at the downtown library. Snow had started falling lightly, dusting the sidewalk and the shoulders of his coat. "You look happy today," he said. I thought about it before answering. "I think I forgot happiness could be quiet," he smiled. "It usually is, when it's real." We stood there under the soft gray sky, not touching, though I could feel the old pull between us. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a door I was allowed to open slowly. The divorce moved forward. Fletcher fought, of course. Men like him do not surrender control gracefully. But his threats had less power once his assets were under scrutiny and his attorneys were busy responding to questions from federal investigators. Morrison Development began losing clients. Articles appeared in business columns using words like irregularities, investigation, and pending review. At first, seeing his name in those articles made me feel sick. Then, strangely, nothing. Fletcher had taken up so much space in my life that I thought his downfall would feel enormous. But the more days I spent outside his house, the smaller he became. Not harmless. Never harmless. But smaller. One Saturday, Elaine accompanied me back to the house to collect my personal belongings. We went with a court-approved arrangement and a retired police officer who stood in the foyer while I walked through rooms I had cleaned, decorated, and never truly owned. The house looked the same. That surprised me. I expected it to feel haunted. Instead, it felt staged. Beautiful furniture. Perfect lamps. Art chosen to impress visitors. Nothing warm enough to miss. In the bedroom, I packed my clothes, my mother's recipe box, a few books, and the old wooden box where I had hidden Julian's memories for decades. Then I saw the navy blue dress hanging in the closet. The $45 dress from the gala. For a moment, Fletcher's voice returned. "Your dress is embarrassing." I reached for it slowly. The fabric felt soft beneath my fingers. Plain, modest, perfectly decent. I folded it carefully and placed it in the suitcase. Elaine watched from the doorway. "You're keeping it?" "Yes," I said, because that dress had stood with me in the shadows, and it had been there the night I was found. 3 months after I began working at Blackwood Holdings, Julian came to my office with an envelope in his hand. "There's something I'd like to ask you," he said. I looked up from a proposal for a citywide adult literacy initiative. He placed the envelope on my desk. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala for the new Blackwood Community Literacy Fund at the Grand Hyatt, the same ballroom. My fingers rested on the card. For a second, I smelled lilies and champagne. I heard glass breaking. I felt Fletcher's hand steering me toward the shadows. Julian spoke gently. "We can choose another venue." I looked at the invitation again, then at the office around me. My bookshelves, my nameplate, my red coffee mug, the life I was building piece by piece. "No," I said. My voice was calm. "We'll hold it there." Julian studied my face. "Are you sure?" I thought of the woman in the navy dress, standing near the bar with a glass of water and a heart full of old grief. Then I thought of the woman I was now, still healing, still afraid sometimes, but no longer hidden. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." And for the first time in my life, I was not going back to that ballroom to stand in the shadows. The night of the Blackwood Community Literacy Gala, I stood in front of my closet for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I had nothing to wear, because I finally did. There were 3 dresses hanging there, all bought with my own money, all chosen without Fletcher's voice hovering over my shoulder. One was emerald green. One was soft gray. One was midnight blue, simple and elegant, with sleeves that fell just below my elbows. But my hand went to the garment bag at the back. Inside was the navy dress, the same $45 dress from the first gala. The one Fletcher had called embarrassing. The one I had stood in when Julian crossed the ballroom and said he had looked for me for 30 years. I had taken it to a tailor weeks earlier. She fixed the tiny pull near the waist, replaced the old buttons, adjusted the sleeves, and pressed it until the fabric looked new without losing the memory of what it had been. When I tried it on, I did not see poverty. I did not see shame. I saw the woman who had stood in the shadows and still survived being seen. So I wore it. This time, I added my silver locket over the neckline. Not hidden beneath the fabric. Not tucked away like a secret I needed permission to keep. Julian was waiting downstairs when I entered the lobby of my apartment building. He wore a black suit, not a tuxedo this time, and held no flowers, no dramatic gift, no performance. He simply looked at me. For a moment, the quiet in his face frightened me. Then he smiled. "That dress," he said softly. I touched the skirt with one hand. "Yes, you look beautiful." The words did not rush into me the way they once might have. I did not need them to repair anything. I could receive them now without collapsing under their kindness. "Thank you," I said, and I meant only thank you. Not "please keep saying it." Not "do you really mean it?" Not "are you sure?" Just "thank you." The Grand Hyatt looked exactly the same when we arrived. The same marble floors, the same chandeliers, the same wide staircase leading toward the ballroom where my life had cracked open months earlier. For a second, my feet stopped. Memory does not ask permission before returning. I heard Fletcher's voice again. "Stay in the back. Your dress is embarrassing." I felt the old sting in my arm where his fingers had pressed into my skin. I saw myself holding a glass of water near the bar, trying to take up less space than my own body needed. Julian noticed I had stopped, but he did not pull me forward. He waited. That was still one of the most healing things about him. He waited until I chose to move. "I'm ready," I said. We walked in together, not with Julian leading me, not with me trailing behind, together. The ballroom had been transformed, but not so much that I did not recognize it. White tablecloths, blue and silver flowers, tall banners with the new foundation's name. Near the stage, framed photographs showed children reading in classrooms, adults holding GED certificates, volunteers sorting books for neighborhood libraries. This was not a room built only to impress wealthy people. This time, the money had a purpose. Rebecca saw me first and waved from across the room. Elaine Porter stood near the front table, laughing with a judge I recognized from one of our hearings. A school principal from Aurora introduced me to 3 teachers. A librarian hugged me as if we had known each other for years. People said my name all evening. Maureen. Not Mrs. Morrison. Not Fletcher's wife. Maureen. Each time, something in me settled deeper into place. Fletcher was not there. By then, his legal situation had become too tangled for public appearances. Morrison Development was under investigation, several of his accounts remained frozen, and our divorce was moving toward final judgment. His attorneys still sent letters full of careful outrage, but they no longer frightened me. A letter is only paper when you stop believing it has teeth. I did not ask where he was. That was its own freedom. Halfway through the evening, Julian stepped onto the stage to welcome the guests. He spoke about literacy, opportunity, and the responsibility of people with resources to do more than write checks for photographs. Then he turned slightly toward me. "But tonight," he said, "this foundation exists because of one woman who reminded me that real community work begins with listening." The room turned. For the first time in that ballroom, every face looked toward me, and I did not wish to disappear. Julian held out his hand. "Maureen, would you join me?" I walked to the stage. My legs trembled, but they carried me. At the podium, I looked out over the room. The bar was in the same place. The shadowed corner was still there behind the decorative palms. Someone else stood near it now, a waiter checking glasses on a tray. It looked so ordinary. I almost wanted to laugh. How strange that a corner could once feel like a sentence. I gripped the sides of the podium and took a breath. When I first stood in this room, I began. I believed my life had become very small. The room went quiet. Not the cruel silence from that first night. Not the silence of people watching scandal unfold. This silence listened. I had spent many years letting someone else tell me where to stand, what to wear, when to speak, and what I was worth. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, I could keep peace. But peace that requires your disappearance is not peace. It is surrender. I saw Rebecca wipe her eyes. Elaine looked down at her hands, smiling faintly. Julian stood beside the stage, watching me with the same expression he had worn at the Blue Moon Cafe. Proud, but not possessive. "I used to teach adults who believed it was too late for them to learn," I continued. "Too late to read fluently. Too late to earn a diploma. too late to change the story their lives had handed them. I told them then what I had to learn again myself. I paused. It is not too late while you are still breathing. The applause came softly at first, then stronger. I did not cry at the podium. I thought I might, but I didn't. Some moments are too whole for tears. After the speeches, after the pledges were made and the first year of programs was fully funded, the quartet began playing near the far wall. Julian came to me with his hand extended. "May I have this dance?" I looked toward the back of the room. The shadowed corner was still there, but it no longer belonged to me. "Yes," I said, but not near the back. His smile was quiet. Never again. We danced beneath the chandeliers in the center of the ballroom. I was not young. I was not untouched by grief. I was not the woman Julian lost 30 years ago, and he was not the man I once had to leave behind. We were older, changed, marked by the years, but his hand was steady at my back, and mine rested on his shoulder without fear. At one point, he leaned close and whispered, "I still love you." This time, the words did not break a champagne glass. They did not stop a room. They did not need to prove anything to anyone. I looked at him, then at the people around us, then at the doorway I had once been dragged through in shame. "I know," I whispered. And this time, I stayed to hear it. For most of my life, I thought a story like mine ended when love was lost, or when a marriage became a cage, or when a woman grew old enough that people stopped asking what she wanted. But I was wrong. Sometimes a life does not end when you are pushed into the shadows. Sometimes that is where you finally learn to see the light. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to take one step forward, the whole room changes around you.